Be advised that this show is not for the faint of heart, easily offended, or children of any age. The opinions and information expressed in this podcast are intended for entertainment purposes only. Deviant Robot provides no guarantee as to the accuracy, completeness, currentness, or validity of this content. Like many things in life, don't take it too seriously and stop using if irritation develops.
Hope you're well. Sunshine, lovely to see you. Gigi, as always, lovely to see you also. Everybody else is just rubbish. Gigi.
Co-host included.
Yeah, exactly. Specifically, actually. Hello, everybody. It is Friday. I hope everybody is fine, alive, and feeling great and got that fantastic Friday feeling going on. We are here with Inspire Reflection, and we are doing some live conversations about having SE conversations and SE adjacent topics and all that good stuff. I am joined by several people I managed to persuade to join me. And we have over there, wait, which direction? That direction. Over there, far left, we have Sushi. Hi, Sushi.
Hello.
Say hello. You don't have a channel, Sushi.
I don't have a channel.
This is my channel. What are you going to plug? What are you going to plug? Have you got an Amazon affiliate link you want to tell us about?
Join us.
There you go.
Talk to people about what they believe and why, and figure out their reasonings, or just have good conversations with other people. There you go.
It's not the place for that. Jeez. Joe, welcome back from Mexico. How was your time in Mexico, buddy? I feel we'll hear more about it later.
Yeah, I'll hold it back for now, but it was a lot of fun. It was a good trip.
Yeah. Do you have a channel to plug or a thing? You've been thinking about the channel? You've been on the cusp of a channel or two, thinking.
Yeah. It'll happen someday, but
you know what you're going to call it? That's the hardest thing.
Yeah, exactly. You guys have got all the good names.
It has to have alliteration.
Yeah, it must. Yeah, it's a compulsory part of the deal. Yeah, we'll see.
Jovial Joe and his jolly. I can't think of a conversation. Joculations. Is that really a word for conversation? Maybe, but it works. I like it. Although it does make him sound like a character from Cats, the musical, which I'm not sure I'm really quite into. But anywho,
we can sneak some innuendo in there somehow. That'd be. Yeah.
We can stick some in, can we? Excellent. All right, we'll find a way of doing that. Diamond, hello, sir. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Yeah.
Do you want to tell us who you are and plug your channel? You've got a channel like a grown-up.
I do.
Person.
That's right. And of course, it's Diamond Discourse in the
There we
great
go. Alliteration.
literal
Double
tradition.
D, huh?
So
Double D.
yeah, just a handful of videos on there, but should be doing more over the summer. So yeah,
Awesome.
good.
Yeah.
Summer
I
makes
can-
it easier, eh? Much easier.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
we're
yeah,
fair weather
totally.
conversationalists.
It's true. I mean, you look for places where you can, have free speech rights and all that, and really it's outdoors. So in the winter, it's kind of freezing if you're, all being snowed on basically. Which some of my conversations were like that. So
Yeah, it's easy really just not to care what the other person is saying when you're freezing cold.
exactly. Yeah. Conditions matter.
Or being rained on. Exactly. Janosch, hello sir, how are you? Do you
Doing
have
good.
your channel yet? There's another one that's been teasing a channel, but is it?
I'm so glad you asked. I don't have the channel yet, and that is your fault, actually.
Oh, my fault.
Yeah, I asked you to help me with it, and you said you'd come.
Yeah, I was going to help you with a logo for it. Yeah.
Right.
that's
Yeah.
right. I
Yeah.
haven't
So
done that.
how about we do that soon?
Interesting use
Other
of the
than-
first person plural, but I like it. Okay.
Other than that, we
I
have
can
the
use
German.
Microsoft Paint. Get you one. Real quick.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I've heard your musical skills.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I will call you about that logo. Okay, well,
we will be exploring that in a moment, but yeah.
Yeah, Sushi can be your intro music.
yeah, we'll see about that. However, I will plug the German language SE channel. The channel exists already. We are on. I said that last time. I think we are on the verge of publishing our very first review video. We've already recorded it. It'll come in the next couple of days.
Awesome.
And the name is I'll say it in German. Sokratischer Weg. That's the way to say it.
You did lean into it, but you didn't have to.
I know.
It would sound just as scary.
I know. Yeah, it's more fun this way.
That's awesome. So that's the Street Epistemology Discord server. If anybody doesn't know, has actually quite a few different language focused areas, and in fact, there was an entire French community which I didn't know existed. So, whatever your language preferences, there are lots of places where you can go and explore SE. And I think the Discord server is a great place to start, even if that's not where they all are. There's like a Russian server, there's like a French server, there's a German server. It's awesome. So yeah, very much equal opportunities for exploring SE. Which is great. I like that. I think it's very cool.
I went on the Russian server. It was fun, but everybody speaks Russian. So I rushed right out of there.
Apart from, how did you know it was fun then?
I don't know.
What's your confidence that it was fun?
I smiled and laughed at
You
least once.
smiled and somebody smiled back. Yay! International relations restored. Brilliant. Let's go.
Yeah. Ending the war one step at a time.
One smile at a time. That's it. We just need to deploy tactical smiles. That solves most problems. So awesome. Enough of this nonsense. Let's move on. We've got lots of topics. Well, we haven't got lots of topics. What we haven't got is a lot of topics. Last week, I think we tried to, the first episode of this is our third ever Inspire Reflection. The first one we tried to answer every single question that was asked of us, which ended up becoming quite manic because there were way more questions than there were capacity to answer. And so what we decided is we would have a much more sort of directed conversational set of questions, and we would ask them. And on the last week's show, it was Sushi, myself, and Lisa from Unruly Lucy from Road to Reflection, and all of the questions were for Lisa because Lisa's fascinating and has got loads of stuff to talk about. So Sushi, just bless him, just sat there like a lump, just looking beautifully well lit, and I felt really bad for him about that. So it actually makes more sense to ask my guests, people coming onto the show, to bring forth interesting conversational topics. And so that's what we're going to do, and that's what we've done. And in good style, we've got some great conversational topics to go through. So we're going to go through the conversations our guests have brought. But honestly, guys, if you have any questions at all, feel free to shout in chat. I'm sure we will find some time at the end of the show if we get to open questions. But if you've got anything at all you want to say, any thoughts on the topics at hand, please feel free to let us know, and we will do our best to answer them. Cool. Enough banter from me. I like this one. This is a great one to start with. Okay, so So moments before we went live, you may notice Sushi's audio quality is not the best. I mean, the audiophiles out there might notice a lack of any kind of dynamic tone whatsoever, right? So it is pretty horrendous. And Sushi, to be fair, has been talking quite a lot about getting a new microphone. So Sushi, you went to a audio hardware store today, and what happened?
Oh, I went yesterday, actually.
Yesterday, okay.
Yeah, and I found this awesome guitar place, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go try out some microphones, and I had some in mind, and then I saw this on the shelf, which is a pocket operator, and if you can tell, I made a decision between microphone and pocket operator. And the question is, can you use SE to make more informed purchasing decisions?
I think you can use any method to make better purchasing decisions than you do, but you know,
a dartboard might have been more successful.
We need to get Sushi a magic 8-ball. That would have been more effective, I think. That would have been.
Yeah, I mean, I saw this on the shelf and I was like, ooh, shiny, let me get that. It's like, even though I wanted a microphone. Yeah.
Did that guy that we didn't have the microphone for, what did he get? Yeah, we saw him in the pocket operator. Good job. That was well played. I think it's a legitimate question, actually, and it sort of also leads into the question I think that Joe was asking today, which is this idea, which is using the ideas of street epistemology in other areas of your life. I think this is definitely an area of your life where we could be using street epistemology. Joe, what inspired you to bring this question to the table today? Are there areas of your life you feel that you have been using, or you really regret not having used SE like Sushi?
Well, it was along the lines of the concept of how, I mean, I've practiced SE formally a little bit. I've consumed a lot of the media of others practicing it, like Diamond and others that posted online. And I noticed how almost immediately after understanding the value of SE and the techniques used, how it was bleeding into conversations just in my natural life with friends. And then, you know, this sort of clash of feeling of, oh, is this, it felt a bit like, you know, was I really comfortable with doing that? And then after a while, it just becomes natural. And I noticed it really improving conversations with others on contentious issues, and just generally having considerably more productive conversations in other areas of my life outside of formal SE practice. So I was really curious at looking at and thinking about and asking the other hosts about how if they perceive as a result of learning SE in the formal sense, how it's impacted their life in other ways, in passing conversations, in an elevator, in intimate conversations with loved ones, and, you know, all of that. So that's sort of what got me thinking.
And purchasing decisions in the case of Sushi, for sure.
Yeah.
Should we demonstrate how bad the purchasing decision was, actually? Because
are we going to do
just
that?
maybe for 10 seconds or 5.
Okay, let's just hear how bad a decision. By the way, I want everybody to bear in mind the quality of Sushi's audio. And instead of a better microphone, he has the ability to do this.
He bought that.
How much did it cost? That's a crucial part of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's only like
$70. Microphone do you need to buy now?
$70.
$70. Yeah, this is one of the cheaper ones.
I was going to say if they didn't give you money, it wasn't worth it. So.
How many mosquito nets could that have paid for?
Oh yeah, I could have fed a lot of children in Africa. Oh man, I really should have SE'd myself on this
gracious. From now on, are we like, instead of an actual price, you just have the number of starving children that you're taking food away from in order to make this purchasing decision? Is that how we evaluate things now? Gracious. All right.
It might actually be effective. Yeah.
So I like this idea of SE. I don't think this is necessarily like SE as such, right? It's not necessarily so there's improving conversations you have with people. I think that can be definitely SE for sure. But there's an awful lot of things I think that if you practice SE or practice this more formal sort of, you know, a conversational style, I think there is a bleeding effect that has on like a lot of your thought processes, right? And I definitely have noticed it. And I've noticed a lot of the things that I've specifically learned in the context of SE, like checking definitions, is brilliant, because it's not something I would ever do. I would sort of almost consider it rude to suggest that we don't share the same definition, and that was such a mistake. And I really value that sort of mental check in my head to now say, let's just make sure we know what all of these words mean and that we agree that we know what they mean and they mean the same thing. I think that's a great thing. But I definitely find like self-reflection using the tools of SE occurring quite a bit. I don't know. Does anybody else find that? I definitely have found that. Nope. Fair enough.
Yes. Nobody wants to step on top of each other. Go ahead, Sushi.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I definitely have used it to self-reflect on things that I believe. Just not recently, but I have used it in conversation, with engaging with family members, rather than, arguing with them about it, asking that point in question, like my brother recently said, like, oh, like canning equipment is going to become really expensive because everybody's going to have a garden and it's going to be really expensive. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, how do you know that? Like, what are you basing that model off of? Oh, well, just look at the way things are. And like, that was the end of the conversation for me. I was like, that was fine, right? Like, maybe that made him think for a second, or maybe he'll reflect back on it. It's like, well, how do you know that the price will actually go up?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say that was like a little micro SE conversation, because you're challenging the reasons, and I think that's a huge part of it. And you're looking to, you're not telling him that he's wrong. You're asking him like, how does he know? And I think that's great. But even just being open to asking questions, I think is, just having that mindset is something that you get as a byproduct of this.
And also having your default as a less adversarial conversation partner. I mean, in my past, I've always thought about things never really in a structured sense, and I've always been really excited by conversation, and I've always liked people. But I was usually so excited by the concepts and how much I thought of them, I would not feel like I was being adversarial, but be so keen to hear what they had to say that it would sound really adversarial, really aggressive, and that's not the way to go if you want to have a productive conversation. So you're being more conscious of how adversarial you're being, and how respectfully you're listening to your conversation partner, and all these things that practicing SE seems to breed, really carried over quickly for me. And I remember distinctly a conversation on a trip, a weekend away with some friends, only weeks after discovering SE and consuming a fair bit of it on YouTube, how a conversation that normally would have derailed into an argument between a particular friend of mine, it was totally diffused by just a few weeks of watching SE videos, and we had a really productive, respectful conversation. And so, I personally felt like it's impacted my life for the better, and I was curious if that's happened for other people. But
that's awesome. How about you, Diamond? Have you felt like since you've been practicing SE, it's been bleeding into other areas of your life?
Oh gosh, yeah, totally. I really only started properly like last year. So I am really new to this, but once I did start taking it in, it really did change how I interact almost every conversation. I must have been a real jerk before, right? But yeah, it's I mean, I used it this morning, and this one I kind of knew I was going to be using it because I attended a workshop type thing on essential oils, which was at my work. I got like professional development credit for attending this thing, and I came home with 2 little vials of peppermint oil and what was the other one? Oh, it was
got to be tea tree, right? It's always tea tree.
No, although they did have tea tree. That's true.
Okay.
But yeah, so like, first of all, going in there before doing SE, I certainly would have dismissed it out of hand, right? and I do think that it helped me think, okay, maybe there's something to this. Go in with an open mind. Hear what are they actually saying? What claims are being made there in terms of benefits? And there were claims that I was interested in investigating. And it wasn't always necessarily the right situation to have a full SE conversation, but when the instructor said, well, you have to be careful because some of these oils are, you don't want to go with cheap stuff, and you want to make sure you go with something good quality. And so then I'm like the only one asking questions. I'm like, well, how can we determine what the quality is? Like, what's the method that you might use for that? And so that was kind of an SE conversation briefly. So yeah, all the time is the short answer.
That's actually a really good question too, because what a lot of people don't realize about those extracts is they can be concentrated chemicals, right? And they can be straight up poisonous if taken in even a few drops, depending on what exactly the chemical is that it's extracted. And they're sold as like natural extracts, but just because it's natural doesn't mean that it's still not a chemical, especially when it's refined. Yeah,
and they pointed out it's not regulated. Yeah.
And they particularly did they warn anyone with pets, because they're particularly deadly to pets in this open diffusers, right? If it
eucalyptus and stuff, or
I can't remember which ones, but I remember my sister was using a couple, and they were particularly deadly to cats in some cases, depending on which one it was. So there are, in fact, natural does not equal good in all circumstances, as Sushi points out. Yeah.
Are you talking about like those diffusers where they have like the water and then you put the oil in it, and then
it
does
exactly.
Thing? Or the cat like drinks out of it or something.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's already. I mean, if somebody tried, if there was something like that at my workplace, I would just be so annoyed. Like my instinct would be just to be annoyed at this being done in my workplace, and that I would get, what did you say, career credit? Like there's some credits.
That's right. What professional development credit?
Professional development credit.
You have to have a certain number of hours each year. So
are you a professional snake oil salesman? Is there some relevant competency here?
I want in.
We go to all the conferences. No.
What fields who decided that gets the credit? Is it the person selling the oils? Because
it falls under the umbrella of health, like improving health and wellness. So this is put out by the Wellness Center, and I teach at a college, but so the Wellness Center, they also have other things that I would be happy to investigate further. Like I've actually gone and done Reiki there, and they have the
what is Reiki?
So putting your hands
oh no,
Reiki practitioners, yes. They don't have to touch you, but they can use their hands. Okay. Actually, I think Gina is an expert on this. Reiki. Maybe I'm mispronouncing it. Yes, apologies. Yeah. But yeah, it goes along with acupuncture and things like that. Some of these alternative medicines. And to be fair, it was never called alternative medicines regarding the essential oils thing. They were very, very careful to say, do not take this as a treatment. We do not substitute these things for actual medical interventions. So I give them credit for trying to be a little cautious.
I'm not sure if that's credit or fear of litigation. But in any case,
fair enough. Yeah, I'll be charitable.
but again, charitability is a great one. I mean, I think from as a principle, I think adopting the principle of charitability is actually quite hard, because we feel that kind of pull to be frustrated and challenged and sort of annoyed by some things that some people might present to us. And it's hard to let go of that instinct to just be annoyed at it and then say something ridiculous. I'm an ex-Reiki practitioner. Oh, Gigi, I did not know that. Awesome. I think the principle of charity and just being open and recognizing that you being annoyed at this thing that is not a great way of challenging it. Like that's a really useful thing to notice. And asking questions actually might be much more effective at pointing out, where there might be issues with it, rather than just being annoyed at it and saying, how dare you, sully my workplace with such nonsense. Yeah, I think that's really cool. How about you, Janosch? Did you have has there been any particular areas where SE practice has sort of led to changes in how you conduct your day-to-day?
I'm not even sure you can avoid that. I think once you really get into SE, you start asking, it becomes natural to ask these kinds of questions. You start thinking the questions as soon as you're confronted with a claim. And on the one hand, I'd say we all like to think that we are a lot more careful about the epistemology and the quality of the epistemology that we use when we draw conclusions. On the other hand, my experience is that sometimes in our practice group, and we'll get to that later, but sometimes I will post a claim in our claims only channel to put it out there so people can choose, can pick that and say, I'd like to interview you on that claim. And more often than not, I will be interviewed and they will ask the SE questions. And it's not like, I know how an SE conversation goes and the kinds of questions that you will be asked, I will be asked in the interview. And still, they will sometimes come up with questions where I go, oh, interesting. I haven't thought about that. And so I think there's still value in doing the interview, and you cannot do it all on your own. There is definitely a benefit of knowing how to do SE and being more thoughtful about your own claims or conclusions or beliefs. However, I do believe that there will always be some blind spots that you yourself cannot detect and someone else can uncover with their questions.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think being open to that is like seeing other people being open to that encourages you to be open to that, right? So the more you talk to people, and I mean, some of the conversations that people have been having, like it's one thing to recognize, you know, how clever the street epistemologists may or may not have been in their elegant questions and politeness and rapport building, but just to see the honest openness of people reflecting and noticing that when you see that, you think, God, that's really, I don't know if I would have been strong enough. And this is a person just in the street, you know, that hasn't been practicing this stuff. And sometimes you'll come across people in these interviews that are just beautifully open and just willing to think about their life and think, gosh, I wish I was more like that person as much as the street epistemologist.
If you haven't watched the video, Being Reasonable, Mark Solomon's show, one of his recent videos we reviewed, Nancy, on reincarnation, is a great example of that, because she's just so reflective and asks these great questions afterwards, and it's a wonderful conversation. Yeah,
I have seen that video, and that review was great. Mark Solomon's stuff is always great, and I really think that it's such a elevating thing to see somebody be that open in a conversation, and it's so disagreeable to see somebody being closed, and I think the more you're sensitive to that, the more you can recognize it in your own behavior. I think I agree with Janosch though. I mean, just because, you know, we practice this a lot doesn't mean we're completely perfect. And a great example of this, Sushi did buy the pocket operator, so we know irrational decisions and conclusions are abound, right? There's no way we're
totally rational. What are you talking about? I love it.
But yeah,
let's talk about the children again, the starving children.
Every time you press a tone on that pocket operator, I want you to think about the small starving child whose life you're oppressing.
An angel's losing its wings.
An angel is losing its wings. No. We've had that time. That time is definitely past. Maybe it's time to look at a returns policy. Maybe that's the time that we're in now. I don't know.
I made him keep the receipt, so I can't return it. You're stuck.
Fantastic. I love it. So any other reflections on the idea of using SE in other areas of your life? I mean, purchasing decisions is definitely one. I definitely feel like personally the impulse to make a purchasing decision, I'm really susceptible to. And here's a depressing thing about me. I've noticed that when I wake up in the morning, if I encounter a video that's telling me about a gadget, like really early in the morning, I will find myself on the Amazon purchasing page, ready to press the button and pull the trigger on that purchase before any real rationalizing has gone on. Like I'm so susceptible, I've noticed, really early in the morning when I've just woken up, and I won't have set out, and there's me buying an electric, steam wok fryer gadget for the kitchen that I'm like, this makes perfect sense first thing in the morning, and I've physically had to stop myself now from making purchasing decisions when I've just woken up. It's the most stupid time to make decisions about anything. Yeah, exactly. Just literally don't do it. And I'm looking at myself thinking, I know I'm an idiot about this stuff, and yet I still fall into these things. But I think the more you practice it, the more you can do it. What was the ooh for?
Because I was gonna say that one metric for improving on your just purchasing decisions is waiting at least 2 weeks, right? If you still want it after 2 weeks without keeping any reminder of it, then you can buy it.
Yeah,
and I said ooh because I've wanted this for over a year now. So
okay, so yeah, still yeah. But I think that's good. But so what we're recognizing is that we are fallible in the sense that we know we like decision energy, emotion, like your sense of yourself in any given moment. You can make really bad decisions that you wouldn't make later on. And I think just being more aware of that, it doesn't cure you of it, but it might stop you at the point where the button's just about to get pressed, and you might think, wait, no, I'm actually no matter how much I think this is perfectly rational and makes sense, I'm gonna step away and think about it later. And I think that's a byproduct about thinking.
Yeah, well, and also the inverse is true. So if you're having hesitations or reservations, you can use SE to probe those as well. So something might be holding you back from attempting something new or even making a useful purchase that is stretching the budget a little bit. So you can use SE to say, okay, well, this is really going to improve my life in a useful way. It might give more time for work and capacity for energy, or improve my sleep, or whatever it might be. And, doubt or hesitation might be holding you back. And again, use SE on that, and maybe you can find the confidence to make that purchase that will really help you.
100%. I actually think fear is a good thing to challenge yourself on. And human beings are very risk averse, and we will do an awful lot to avoid any possible chance of harm or anything scary that we don't like. And sometimes that can make us quite irrational. And I think SEing why we might be afraid of something is a really good, a good thing to do, a good place to use these tools too, because you want to stop away from the emotionality of it and start to look at what is the reality of this being something that really is going to happen or could harm me, and what do I really know about this, rather than just how am I responding to this emotionally. It's a great place to, I think, apply SE.
And it's worth saying that it should work in both regards, because there's been some certain situations I've been in skiing which I'm looking down a slope that's shall we say quite risky, and I probably could have SE'd myself a little better on deciding to do it, and I wouldn't have ended up in the emergency room. So fear can be tweaked in both directions.
What's your confidence you can do that on 12 vodkas and one ski? I mean,
yeah. So.
Awesome. All right, guys. Go ahead.
I was just gonna add that I can also see it being used for diet and exercise and things like that. But I'm wondering if there's a subtle distinction between mindfulness or just self-reflection in general versus SE. When you're just doing it internally like that, could we distinguish between those?
I absolutely would not say that this was SE. So I think I think it's a really important distinction. I think these things occur more. These kinds of thought processes are more likely to occur to you as a byproduct of practicing SE, but they are not in and of themselves, in my view, SE. And I think that's totally fine. Some people get quite annoyed by that because they think, oh no, but I've benefited in this meaningful way because of this SE, so I want this to be part of it. And it's like, well, you can still have that benefit. It takes nothing away from that idea of it not being considered to be SE. I think SE has to always usefully considered to be a very narrow and specific thing. But these are definitely really useful byproducts.
So what's missing for you in order for it to be SE?
Conversation partner.
Yeah, conversation partner. So my definition of street epistemology is quite narrow. I think I have a banner here for it. Let me dig this out. So I consider it to be, oh, well, that's weird. Why did that pop up like that? Oh, okay. This is set to ticker for some reason. This is uniquely unhelpful. Technical failure.
Okay,
Maybe-
just leave it. Just leave it.
Yeah,
we
just
got
leave
this.
it scrolling
There we go.
because that. Oh, okay.
Oh, there you go.
We
Hey.
fixed it. We could just fix it. Street epistemology is the act of respectfully encouraging others to honestly and critically reflect on the reasons they believe what they believe. That's my definition. That's the one I've been trying to push forward. And I think it's an act. I think it's an active thing that you're doing and specifically doing for somebody else. And I think that's the essence of SE. It's helping somebody else essentially reflect on their reasons.
So it's that word others over there.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think when we're applying the process internally, it's not the same. You're just pointing to diamonds. I really missed that moment. We did the SE live show, and I was trying to read like a puppet from underneath. It was it kind of worked quite well. Okay, now nobody knows the left from the right because it's hilariously depressing. But yeah, I think it's important that it doesn't take anything away from the fact that you are likely to improve your own ability to self-reflect by just not calling that SE doesn't take anything away from it at all. And I think, yeah, to me, that's a super important point.
And that's essentially capturing the essence of what I was trying to ask, which is why I made the distinction in proposing the question of formal SE practice and other areas of your life, because I don't believe, as you say, with the self-reflection and mindfulness, as Diamond put it, is SE, but those things can be improved by aspects of the way that you practice SE with others. So I've found it incredibly useful.
Oh
no,
we've lost a Joe. But I think the idea that you're going to be thinking more about thinking, like just thinking more about critical thinking more about cognitive biases, thinking more about logical fallacies, it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to still fall for them, but it does make it slightly more noticeable to you. You are going to be slightly more sensitive to the problems. Oh, we've got it back. He's back. Welcome back from the Matrix, Joe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it's a really good point. I like it. Cool. Well, should we roll on to our next topic?
I just wanted to point out Ragnar's comment of using SE with the police.
That's a really interesting place to use SE.
How confident are you that I was speeding?
Yeah.
So you've used a speeding gun. How do you know that this is correct? When was it last calibrated? A legitimate question.
Is that a personal experience that you used to measure that, read that speeding gun? Could your eyes have deceived you?
If the gun hadn't told you I was speeding, what would your confidence be? Excellent. I like it a lot. Right, cool. What's the next topic? So how effectively can you practice street epistemology with other people who are familiar with it? This is a super cool question. And yeah, definitely keen to hear your thoughts. Janosch, this was your suggested topic, and I know you touched on it already, but do you want to give us your thoughts on why you chose this topic?
Yeah, sure. Since we have the German practice group and we meet up twice a week now, each Wednesday and Sunday at 8 o'clock German time, for anyone watching, like I said, we put our claims in that channel, and then people can say, I'd like to interview that claim. And we try to at least somewhat go through the motions of establishing rapport, even though that, I think, is one major point that you can't really practice. Because if you're in a group with people who know each other pretty well, who like each other, get along well, you already have the rapport, and there's almost nothing you can do during the conversation to damage that rapport. Because, I mean, you put your claim in that channel and you agree to have that challenge, and you know what's going to happen. Yeah, the question is how effectively can you actually practice for real life SE conversations, which may happen with a police officer or someone at work selling snake oil, or someone at the park, or yeah.
That's a great question. Sushi, you run the SE practice sessions, or one of them on a Saturday. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit challenging because of how realistic is it actually having these practice sessions when you're having people that are very experienced with it. And the thing is, I don't really know, right? Like there is some practice involved, like it helps us ask the better questions, but it doesn't address like the more dynamic aspect of like engaging with somebody in public, where you have to first off strike the conversation with them initially, right? Build rapport with them, introduce them to what the heck you're even doing, and then start to investigate the claim. And when we are doing the practice sessions, right, like people already have a claim, right? They already like have some level of rapport. They're expecting to be questioned, right? So yeah, like I although I think it is useful, it's to have these practice sessions. I don't know how like representative it is to actually being out there in public doing it. And this is actually a concern that's been raised, and something that I'm trying to improve on is to try to get people into the server to have the practice sessions with that aren't so familiar with it, so we can possibly have more realistic practice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Diamond, am I right in thinking? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead.
No, go. Go!
It's a Canadian standoff, and I'm going to win. So,
a British person won't be out-polited by anybody if they.
Well, I was only going to reflect that. I think the knowledge of SE is not the sole factor here. For example, it's going to be the motives behind the person anyway. So they might be intimately knowledgeable of SE and its the techniques that people use in practicing it and all the rest of it, yet have no intention to have a good faith conversation in the first place. So if you now in this scenario, us thinking about this question, now try to engage them, I'm thinking of a SE conversation I had that there was informed consent and all the rest of it, and immediately the person went so hard to derail off an SE conversation and went on the hobby horse of their particular philosophical thing, and I had to work so hard to bring it back to an SE conversation. So it was clear that this, to me anyway, that this person just wanted to talk about something that would go on the internet, as opposed to. So, there are loads more than just their knowledge of SE. It doesn't make somebody immune to not being an honest interlocutor or a productive conversation partner. So, but in essence, I think it is a benefit, as somebody mentioned in chat, like this comment here, and we touched on it briefly, but I think that's really true. Like if Diamond was to question me on a claim right now, I would, well, not only because Diamond's such a nice guy, but I would try so hard to be genuine and honestly reflect and everything. I would be into the product because I would know the usefulness, and I would want to analyze my claim and make sure that I had sound reasoning for it. And I think instead of rolling the dice in the public, there might be a basis in which I would be a better conversation partner, or at least a more willing and genuine and open conversation partner. So it's interesting. But again, I think it's more than just the knowledge of SE. It's what's behind the person as well. So
I think we might want to distinguish between what makes for good practice and being able to skip some steps if you already understand, like, the person has got good motives, you understand that they're trying to help you and that you're on board with that. You can certainly skip some steps of trying to maybe introduce it. So I think there's certainly, like, as you say, if you were to talk to Diamond in this moment, like, I don't think you would have to be concerned that Diamond's motives were actually trying to sell you natural oils or something. Although maybe I don't know.
Plan hasn't worked.
But yeah, you wouldn't be concerned that he was trying to do something other than apply street epistemology, which helps for your conversation. But I guess the question is, would it be? It still, I would argue, would make for bad practice, maybe because you were just not practicing applying those steps because you could skip them, right? So maybe the practice is not giving you that muscle memory. Diamond, am I right in thinking you've run some of those practice sessions as well?
I've hosted a couple times. I like to sub when people need a break, but I've been super happy to have Sushi on there. And I really enjoy it. I actually started my practice on there before I started making a channel and going out in the street, and it was really useful for me as an intermediate step. But exactly what Sushi was saying, I would agree with that. It didn't fully prepare me. Like, I didn't feel like it was the same thing. It was like maybe 30% of it. Hi, Lisa. Entertain me. Are you not entertained?
Dance, monkey dance.
But yeah, so I think that it got me a portion of the way there, but stopping people on the street and trying to build rapport from that is totally different. And the major thing for me is establishing a claim. It is so like cheating to me to just come with a claim because there's so much effort in narrowing down and crystallizing the thought and not bouncing between ideas. And that is one of the things I struggle the most when I'm actually out in the street.
Yeah, I think that's great. One thing I will say for sure is that I think the fact that the SE practice sessions occur is a brilliant thing, and I actually think it's genuinely heroic of those people that have been running them, except for Sushi, obviously, but everybody else that runs them, it's
from joy to
actually
from
made me
joyous
feel
to
bad then.
distraught in seconds. That was beautiful.
but no, sincerely, no, I genuinely
The
think
trombone.
Wah, wah. I think those practice sessions are fantastic. They totally, none of these criticisms I think would be sufficient to say that they shouldn't happen. There's definitely more benefit there than negativity. I definitely have been concerned in the past, and I think firstly the skipping steps thing I definitely hear a lot. Like some people are very still good at building rapport, but other people I think just rely on the fact that they're there every week and they don't need to do that so much. And so I think it stops the building of that muscle memory, which would be concerning if they ever sort of forgot that step in a live conversation, as it were. The other thing, the claims thing, I totally agree with that as well. Like, the claims are often structured in such a way to make it hard for the other person to explore it, because they're really, and this is often unfortunately the case, that and increasingly I think it is the case, is people are really not looking so much to explore the claim as be able to soapbox a position for everybody else to have to listen to for 10 minutes, which is unfortunate. And I think that they do either heavily baked in with sort of protections against the street epistemologists being able to explore them by sort of wording them in a tricky way, or they're just frankly not meaningful claims. And what I mean by that is they're sort of academic in nature. They don't really think that they would change their life at all one way or the other if the claim was to be different. And so they don't really have much at stake in the claim as exploration. And I think that's an important thing, because one of the things that we really need to practice and be sensitive to as people going out and having conversations with people is extending empathy to these claims, extending empathy to the person behind it, and noticing when they're uncomfortable or maybe there's a lot at stake with them, and helping them not just explore the position but explore it at their pace and being sensitive to that. And I think a lot of that gets missed when the claim is sort of this artificial thing. And one further point on that, a final point, is the idea of steel manning a claim, which is a conversation that I was really slightly pleased to have with juggling lessons recently, because I remember juggling lessons kindly steel manning a position for me to explore, and I really hated that experience, because again it was hard to extend my intuitions towards empathy when I know the position's not a really genuinely held position. And so when I was finding maybe difficulties, when I was finding ways to challenge the position, I didn't know whether I was just pointing out failures of the steel manning or whether I was actually finding failures of the claim itself. And I found that so confusing and uncomfortable as a thing. And so I suspect that pretend claims or claims that are being explored for the sake of just exploring them are always going to lack this tone and these important details.
So what if you didn't know they were steel manning?
Yeah,
that would be great. That would be easier for me for sure. So I go ahead, Joe.
Well,
and I was just going to say, people can be quite knowledgeable on a claim in which they don't believe and can have discussed it extensively.
Yeah.
Biggie, whom some will be familiar with from the Deviant robot community, but he once said that to me. He'd make such a better apologist than a lot of apologists that he knows, and he I mean, I'm sure you could actually, he could stand by one of the Christian claims and be conducted SE on and have an extremely convincing position as a believer of that. You know what I mean? So I think effectively it could be done. And then Diamond's question is really interesting. If you didn't know they were steel mailing, then maybe even further. So
it would definitely make it easier, because I wouldn't feel like I was bullying their failure to build the steel man, rather than therefore I would be concerned about that less. One thing that
have some trust in them. Just
well,
trust.
Yeah, sure. That is probably what I should have done. But again, so my empathy was now being applied in two places. I was trying to be empathetic with the steel man and empathetic with the person responsible for the steel man, and it just broke my brain. One thing I as a random observation though, I really, really enjoy representing steel man positions. I like it when I challenge people who don't know me. I enjoy steel manning a theist perspective. I find it quite entertaining, but I also find it
William. That's just called trolling. What you're doing.
It's actually steel trolling. Thank you. That's the official steel trolling. Okay. That's it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, what I found really interesting, I think I wasn't there when you had the Steelman conversation, when juggling lessons was steel mining the position, but we talked about that with him. And what I found really interesting was that he said, what's important when you're steel manning a position for SE practice is that you don't just have to know the position and be able to steel man the position. You have to be able to steel man the point where the interviewer will ask you a question that will get you thinking. You have to think about that in advance. What's the kind of what kind of argument have I not considered? What's a new thought to me that will get me to have an aporia, basically? And I found I have steel manned or role played or whatever flat earther before, and I picked a really easy flat earther because I just played someone who didn't really have any arguments but was very abrasive and dismissive and said, well, just watch the videos, just look at the evidence yourself. How stupid can you be? Just come on, it's obvious. Just open your eyes. It's right there. The truth is out there.
Wake up, sheeple. That's what you know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's easy to play because I didn't really have a point where I would stop and think. So I think that was very valuable advice, that if you are steel manning a position, think about those questions in advance. What are the questions that will get me thinking?
I think the act of steel manning a position, I think doing this role play is actually really a good exercise because it helps you explore empathetically why somebody might be convinced by these arguments. Once you fully adopt it and you kind of go in, I definitely think the act of steel manning is a very useful one in terms of, let's be clear, a distinction between steel manning, which is just being able to articulate your opponent's view back at them in a manner in which they will happily accept that fairly represented what their claim is. And then I guess what we'd be talking about with regards to steelman roleplay, which would be sort of adopting the persona of somebody who believed that, as well as representing that view as honestly as you could. And I think the steelman roleplaying thing has value. I just don't know how much value it has to an SE practice context. And interestingly, to sort of clarify Juggling's thoughts on this, was he said that he's now become aware that that the steelman position is not a good tool. He doesn't think. I think he's had other people question it, and he's reflected on it and isn't quite so convinced it's a great tool. And he was actually very good, as far as I could tell. He was very good at it. What do you guys think? I had this is a little experiment I did once where I tried to do street epistemology with an AI conversation. I don't know if you saw that conversation, but have you guys thought about that? I found it quite interesting because the AI's consistency is obviously a little bit all over the place. So trying to work out how you can ask it a question to keep it like on track, there were weird moments where I was like, this is scarily like having a conversation with a human, and that's not because the machine was being rational.
It sounds like a conversation in VR chat that we were trying to have.
Those are very different, but yeah. But yeah, I wonder if at some point there could be some AI driven interlocutors that could sort of represent the arguments and the views. I think it might be an achievable thing. Future
or
SE,
have their own claims. You could even for a claim.
They've come to a position.
Interesting question. What would be easier to implement in AI, the interlocutor or the interviewer?
That's a great question. That's a really good question.
Instinct tells me the IL, but I don't know.
Oh, I was going to say the interviewer.
Yeah, me too.
I think people's inclination would be the interviewer, but I think that's because I wonder if people feel that the act of doing an SE interview is a kind of mechanical thing. Like you just move through the steps, and providing you put the polite question with the right phrasing, it's fine. And I think you could go quite far with that, but I suspect that there's actually a lot more, and this is where I talk about empathy specifically. I think there's a lot more about intuition and empathy that you might be doing to be effective in those conversations than is necessarily apparent in just the mechanics of the questions themselves, like looking at body language, listening to hesitations and like eye movement, and paying attention to the apparent signs of stress, and listening to how long the pauses were, and I think you do a lot of that if you're an effective conversation partner. I think a lot of that is actually really important, but it's not necessarily something we've sort of codified, I guess, as of yet. What do you guys think to that?
Yeah, I see difficulties in the interviewer side for sure, from a programming sense, and then the turn required in the questions to effectively continue to practice SE, and that the way that you might form a question, respectfully. And then there's also the problem of, is it text, or once we have a voice in it, like seamless voice interface and all the rest of it, then that's another. I was thinking purely in a text conversation as the one you had that you posted on Deviant, on the Deviant Robot website.
Right.
But,
does it even need to be a text? Couldn't it just be like a bunch of like touchscreen boxes? Like, what is your belief? Like, push the button, and then it's like takes you to the next. Okay, well, what reasons did you use? And you just select, personal experience, or, I tested it myself, or somebody told me about it, right?
Right, but the communication back and forth in that case is still text-based as opposed to intonation, like, voice, and that's more what I meant in that sense, but yeah.
So one thought experiment I've had about this is could you construct a poster that you could hand out to people, and that poster, when they looked at it, would honestly and respectfully encourage them to critically reflect on the reasons why they believe what they believe? I think you could. I think there are different ways of achieving this goal that aren't necessarily just a one-to-one conversation. So one of the things maybe we might, if we were to agree, and I don't think we do, and I think there's a large amount of discussion about what SE is, but if we were to agree that really what SE wants to do is achieve this goal, then I think there are actually a variety of different ways in which we could talk about achieving it in different contexts and different situations with different tools. So maybe this conversational style might be difficult for an AI to adopt, or maybe not. I mean, I'm not sure. But maybe there are different ways in which we could, you could literally have a touch screen that would maybe encourage you to critically and honestly reflect on whatever it was you believed. Some people have pointed out, I think not unfairly, to the fact that the SE questionnaire, for example, might, just by reading those questions, achieve the goal of street epistemology. Maybe that's one way in which you could repackage this idea and be achieving the goal without having to have the conversation approach. Any thoughts?
I'd be interested to collect data about that. Like, I mean, that seems like a pretty easy thing to do. Like, why not just hand out like the questionnaire to a bunch of people and then have them fill out another questionnaire to ask them, did it make them reflect?
Yeah,
a follow-up to the, especially after some time to process, because I do agree that I think that simply the process of the SE questionnaire can absolutely start to get people on more shaky ground with how they're processing things and how they're believing things, because they have to hear themselves answer those questions in their mind. And so necessarily they're reflecting on something that they may not have thought about at all in their entire life. But I really like that idea from Sushi, but a follow-up questionnaire after the fact, and especially given some time to process. Maybe it's a week later. Maybe they've had a week to sit and think about it, and you ask some very specific, direct follow-up questions. That's actually a really cool concept. I'd love to see that.
I've said a few times that I think probably the impact of an SE conversation probably doesn't happen during the conversation. I think it always happens something like the next day in the shower in the morning when you're getting ready to go to work. And then that's when sort of your mind is still processing some of this stuff, and boom, you're suddenly like, wait, why do I think that? Like that's where I think that the thing lands. One of the interesting challenges here is that you can't measure reflection. Like, it's really like you can ask people to self-report. Like, that's a real, like, really, I think the only way we could do it, and that's actually fraught with problems. It's very difficult to measure reflection. I think if we could measure reflection in some way, it would be probably the most useful tool that Street Epistemology has, because then you could measure the relative efficacy of different methods, and you could notice when you were doing better or worse. It would be I don't know, Sushi, do you think you could measure reflection?
Why not?
Cool.
Like, if I asked you the question of, like, if I asked you a question, right, that led you to either think whether or not you are right or wrong, that's a measure of reflection. So I could ask somebody, like, at some point in time, did any of the questions make you question whether or not you were right and wrong about your claim? And
but you and I have just sat here for a conversation for 20 minutes, right? And I know you've been asking me questions to try to get me to reflect on a position that I've had, right? And you seem like a nice boy, and I don't want to upset you. So I'm going to say, yeah, no, that's really made me think a lot. And then, you know, I think there are lots of reasons why we might report favorably in that kind of circumstance.
Did you enjoy this conversation? I hate that question. Who's gonna say no, right?
But like in a study, right? Like with a follow-up questionnaire, like where you encourage them to answer honestly, like where it's not that personal reflection, then like I think that's achievable. Like,
I think it's probably as good as we've got. I mean, to be honest with you, I think it's worth recognizing the fallibility of those methods. But in a lot of social sciences, these are the only tools available. Because you know, I think you need to just get self-report.
What if you had several different methods, like side by side? You had SE, and then just meditative practice and some other thing. You do like 3 or 4 of these, and then at the end of those 4, you ask people, could you rank which one helped you reflect the most on some position? You know, that could be an interesting way to do it.
I still wonder whether or not because the reflection doesn't necessarily happen in that moment either, right? So that you could
do it
say
a week later.
Yeah. I mean, you could, but then maybe there's something that you forget about that, but then maybe a year later, this other part of it. Do you know what I mean? Like when the experiment never ends.
Is that falsifiable, William?
No, absolutely not. No, it's totally not. But this is the problem. It's like I think it's really hard to get strong, convincing numbers on this stuff. And it's not just SE. I think it's a lot of like similar fields. Like they really, you know, for example, the medical industry has an incredibly difficult time trying to understand what people's different perceptions of pain are, you know, and that's a very much more tangible thing than reflection, one might argue. And so if something like that is incredibly difficult to measure, then what hope do we have for something as interesting as reflection?
I think, as I agree with you in the sense, there's a lot of room for false negatives and all sorts of things with that method we're discussing, in the sense that it could be a cherished belief that someone's been led to question a little bit, and or some form of discomfort, and so they rebel against it and say, no, it didn't make me think at all. You know, there's rooms for all kinds of false negatives, but I still think that we could get some useful information out of it, even if it's 1 in 10. And we're not necessarily cherry picking then for results that affirm what we're doing to be positive, but if they're asked to expand on the reflection, we may get some really useful insight to the efficacy of the questionnaire or what reflection does for them in general. I don't know. I still think there's room for really useful data there, if not, you know, hard, scientific, accurate, you know, precise data.
Yeah, especially I think you don't have to get absolute numbers, because that would be incredibly difficult, but you can compare different techniques, different different styles of questioning or whatever, and ask if one of them was more effective in getting them to think about their belief or inspire that kind of reflection. And I think that's true for pain as well. You can probably ask them, is this worse or this? And people will go, no, please go back. That's worse. That's
maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe we're asking like the wrong question, right? So like
Classic street epistemologist.
yeah, right. So like when it comes to like pain, like I recently broke my leg, and like what is my level of pain? It's like, well, that's too generalized of a term, but I can describe the sensation that I'm having, right? Like a shooting sensation down my like shin bone, or like a throbbing in my kneecap, or like a discomfort. Right. So maybe we're generalizing too much when we're just saying reflection, rather than saying like, what pain are you having, or what is your pain level, is to what is the sensation that you're feeling that is causing you pain, right? That might give us more useful data.
I think that's an interesting thing as well, because like the nature of reflection is not necessarily nearly as apparent to people as the notion of pain. Like, what do we mean by reflection? Is it because actually one of the problems in the SE community is we falsely equate, for example, changing an opinion to an effective SE conversation, right? Which is actually a really bad measure, right? It's not like there's no reason why somebody should change their mind after reflecting as honestly and meaningfully as anybody else, right? And so whether they become more or less confident, for example, is hey Biggie, sorry Janosch.
What's up, Biggie?
It is a sign that they usually, if you change your mind, you had to reflect, but if you have reflected, doesn't mean that you will change your mind.
Exactly. Yes. I guess you're right. Yeah, it is an indicator one way.
Unless, of course, that the belief that you have is super not important to you, then you might change your mind without even really reflecting on it. Just whatever. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
And it's funny. It's interesting that you mentioned it, because I was going to bring it up earlier. Of the are we even sure that the person being conducted the interlocutor or reading the interview knows what we mean by reflection? Is the definition clear enough? Like, you may want to word it not using the word reflection, but in a longer sentence. So did any of these questions get you to think about positions that you've held before, or wonder about the methods that you were using to hold these positions, or it's like, instead of just a blanket word?
There seems we need a metric like HPM, right? And H stands for the like how many per minute you can generate. Like, it doesn't matter what the leads to, but as long as there is one, that's kind of cool. We need that HPM metric.
I'm gonna rank all the YouTubers by HPM right now.
There's a Penny Pal from the SE community pointed this out, and I've never forgotten it because it was brilliant. She pointed out this idea that street epistemologists can be somewhat keen to mistake confusion with aporia, and I think it's a useful lesson to some people can look like they're reflecting, but actually they just are trying to work they are reflecting, but they're reflecting on what mistakes have led them to be trapped in this conversation with this person, and how can they get out of this conversation as quickly as possible. That may be some of the reflection that's being generated there. Cool. Awesome. Right. Let's hit our next topic. We're burning through these, but I'm really enjoying this conversation, guys. This has been awesome. Let's pick another topic. So this was my topic. When might you want to disengage from the conversation?
This is a perfect time. I'm out.
Bye.
Well,
I'm too lazy to get in on the joke.
Excuse me. I need to find a better quality of guest. Can anybody help me find a better quality of guest? The bar is very low, so you're.
Well, this is about as good as you're going to get right here, so I'm not sure.
That's going to be. I mean, none of us has any friends, so I don't know what you're expecting.
Well, that's true. This is true. We're all in it.
Do you think there's any possibility that you could be wrong
about being able to get a better quality of guest?
Well, that's a good point. A good question to ask to determine if you should disengage from the conversation.
Oh, I see. I gotcha. Right. That was fantastically dramatic, Diamond. You sort of swung back into frame. That was wonderful. That was. Do you have transitions enabled? That's amazing. I've never met a person that can transition like that.
Is that how you enter conversations on the street as well?
This
You
is my
just
fade
slide
in,
front
fade
of the person?
Just enabled fade in, fade out there too. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Nice.
So yes, when might you want to disengage from the conversation? So this was inspired by a conversation I had recently where, and actually it was also slightly inspired by a conversation that Anthony had with, we did an SE review on, where Anthony had a conversation with a pastor. I always say pastor. But if I say pasta, it sounds like pasta, like spaghetti. And like anyway, a gentleman who runs a ministry, and he was being interviewed on the Mormon Stories.
Runs a ministry. I love it. It's the perfect shorthand for pastor. It's good.
Runs a minestrone. What did you think I said? Pastafarian. Yeah. Anyway, this gentleman was basically Anthony. So have you guys all seen this video where he's talking to the gentleman and he basically decides not to continue the conversation? I think it's one of those, it's a rare example and too rare an example, I think, where you might want to think about like backing out of the conversation. Anthony was basically not comfortable pursuing it because the gentleman in question was basically representing the idea that if he was to no longer hold this position, he would become a horrible person, would start harming himself and others, would likely turn to alcohol and drugs, etc., and harm people. He was specifically talking about actually doing violence to people. And Anthony, therefore, I think quite reasonably just said, I'm just not comfortable in this moment, and so I'm gonna want to end the conversation. And I think that was an amazing example because, frankly, in any case, I think it's actually quite hard to end a conversation, and I think we can talk about that. But in the other case, like in that particular example, there were so many. The better guests are visiting better hosts. God damn! God, drive by from chat there. Shots fired.
Mic drop.
Shit.
I mean,
way to insult everybody in the show all at once.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for that. I love it.
But by the way, the people who are in the chat, why are you here?
Trickles down.
Oh man, this is great. That's great.
Brilliant. Oh. Yeah. That was me talking about a genuinely important topic as well. God damn. Shots fired.
Yeah, let's skip that. Whatever.
So yes, anyway, so not only did he pull back, but he pulled back at a point where, he was actually on it was being recorded. It was part of a live thing. And there were cameras there, and it was ridiculously built up as a kind of SE versus pastor, somebody or other. And like, it was all a bit silly. And even under those circumstances, I thought it was genuinely, especially courageous of Anthony just to end it. So I guess my question to you guys is like, have you ever had a conversation with somebody that has made you hesitant to, oh yeah, great. Thanks, Diamond. I appreciate that. This was the conversation. Have you guys ever had a conversation with somebody and felt that, maybe you needed to pull back from that and oh, that's weird. We've gone to this weird framing. Wanted to stop and maybe tried to do things differently?
I think I have, but on a different level, which I don't want to derail it too much, but I think it's also an interesting concept. A couple of times when you and I were doing VR chat as a way to, so for those that don't know, there's essentially this program where VR users can go in and talk virtually to each other. They have avatars and they can have conversations. And so Will and I saw it as a way.
Way more civilized than it really is.
There's no need to go into the depth of despair that is VR chat. Essentially, it's a way, we perceived it to be a way to have conversations with strangers that didn't require especially, Diamond mentioned trying to do SE in the winter and all the rest of it. It's a far larger, far more easily accessible pool of minds to have conversations with. So we thought, and I noticed a few times, I'd be chatting away to somebody and trying to have a conversation, and I'd sort of get a message from you on the side saying, do you think you're chasing a suboptimal conversation partner here? And it was interesting in the sense that is how much of it is about, for me at that time, it was about practicing and getting better at SE and it reminds me of another conversation, which I don't know if you mind me mentioning, with Mike.
Okay.
So my conversation with Mike on the Inspire Reflection channel was a real challenge. So I actually referenced it earlier because I don't think he was really interested in reflecting at all. I think he just wanted to run by, as in his mind, an atheist, his newly discovered philosophical worldview. And so, but I wasn't really ready to just terminate the conversation right away. And I actually did, well, I think through patience, bring him back to a more SE and actually got him to present a claim. So this was, I don't know if I should have ended it because he didn't really send it, or if that was good practice for me to go through the motions and try to bring him back to an SE space. And he did eventually bring up events in his life. And I'm not sure if it inspired any reflection, but did that make me an better SE practitioner? Was I right to continue the conversation there, or should I have ended it? So I haven't run into any ethical concerns yet, but certainly more on the sort of practicality side of things. This was my conversation with Mike Manic. But I don't know. Do you have any opinion on that, like on how I dealt with the conversation, or if I should have continued, or what do you think?
You muted, William.
You will.
Thank you. I think it touches on a few things, which is kind of, there are different reasons why you might want to end the conversation, right? And one of them is the well-being of yourself. Another is the well-being of the person you're speaking to. And one of them, I think, is that the conversation is ceasing to become useful. And I definitely think that it's useful to be aware of all of those different possibilities, because I think if you're not prepared to walk away from a conversation for any of those three reasons, that you might find yourself in a really quite bad situation, like an unpleasant situation with somebody. You might want to, disengage when the conversation is not productive and potentially harmful. Absolutely. Platforming, yes. Yeah, potentially, for sure. So yeah, I think those are the three reasons why you might want to disengage. And I think that I think it's something that should be thought about and talked about more often. I think the platforming one is the one that you were sort of essentially thinking about in your conversation with Mike, Joe, if I'm right. Like Joe was basically just sort of expounding, and he wasn't really entering honestly into the conversation. You felt, is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, a little bit of backstory here, and I mean, I like Mike, and he hangs around the SE community, and I'm sure I'll see this. So I don't mean this in any disrespect, and I've spoken to him about it, but it didn't really seem to me that he was coming into this honestly after how he presented it beforehand. And then it turns out that he has a ministry and all this other stuff, and he just the conversation started that he just wanted to push this idea of his ministry, and so it felt a little dishonest in that sense. So I guess kind of was it selfishly for me then to continue and try to get him over to the SE side of things? And yeah, I don't know what you think about that whole situation. We haven't actually discussed this, so I'm curious.
Yeah,
should I have disengaged there?
Yeah, I don't think it's a selfish thing. I think when you say the SE side of things, that's not get him to agree with you. That's get the conversation to become sensible. Like move the conversation into a space where you can be talking honestly with each other.
So
and I don't think. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Well, I want to just flag the term honesty, and I want to come back to it. So finish your thought first. I didn't.
Yeah, no, it's a good flag. Yeah, for sure. I think in the situation where I think if you're feeling your conversation is not being productive, that there are a wide range of reasons for that, right? And one of them might be that your conversation partner is not really genuinely trying to reflect and is actively resisting and is not really interested in having a productive conversation. Your conversation partner could be impaired for some reason, right? So they could be drunk, right? There's all kinds of reasons why you might not be in the right contextual reason, space to actually give the conversation the time and attention it deserves. And I think it's fine to continue as long as you're feeling that you're not harming them and you're not being harmed, like, then continue. But if you find that the lack of openness is causing you frustration, I think there's a tendency for that to then bleed over into being annoyed with your conversation partner. And I think the moment that starts to come out, then you've kind of well and truly gone off the rails. So I would just, I think that's probably with regards to your conversation partner being in the game, as it were. I would say that's the important thing to notice if you're frustrated with the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, if I could ask, because a few times I've heard you guys mention honesty and like honest IL, or when you're dealing with maybe a dishonest IL, and I always bristle a little bit at that, and I'm hoping maybe it's just a definitions thing that I'm thinking of the term differently. So I guess I'd ask, how do you identify a dishonest IL?
So I think it's probably better not to use honest and dishonest. I think it's probably a lazy language. Maybe what we mean by honest and dishonest is doxastically open or closed, something like that, right? If you're doxastically closed, that means you're not willing to consider arguments that might make you think. You're going to resist them on principle rather than actually try to engage with the conversation and actually follow it where it's leading. And that's not just meaning disagreeing, because disagreeing is different. You have to engage with the topic to disagree with it. But if you're doxastically closed, you're just resistant to the very idea of thinking about it. I think that's probably what I think I'm meaning by dishonest. Or you may be just willfully stringing, not even listening to the conversation. So and then just using it as an opportunity to soapbox your own views. I've definitely heard people do something similar to that, but I would definitely put that into that same bracket of doxastic closure.
I'm not even
Yeah.
sure.
Sorry, go ahead, Janosch.
I was going to say, I'm not even sure when you perceive your interlocutor to be doxastically closed, whether that is necessarily a reason to end the conversation. Because I think once you notice that, you can have an interesting and productive conversation about that fact.
Oh yeah.
If I think it's more about their willingness to actually engage in that kind of conversation and be open to having that conversation and actually answer your questions to the best of their abilities, rather than kind of abuse the conversation for their own agenda.
Yeah, well, I'm curious if there's a way to probe how genuine you perceive the IL to be without seeming combative. Like, is there a way to do that without destroying rapport, with a desire to have a productive conversation? Can you even address that with your IL without immediately introducing an adversarial nature to the conversation?
I think the problem with doxastic closure. Sorry, Joe. I thought you'd.
No.
The problem with doxastic closure is that I think it creates a narrative of protection for the person you're speaking to, right? They're protecting their views and they're just not open to listening. And I think if you've got a protection narrative, then you're going to feel that questions have an attack narrative. And I think in that sense, there's a potential for people to feel that they have a license to become disagreeable. As in, if you're protecting how you feel, or not and resisting thinking about something, I think you might feel more justified in feeling attacked and therefore feeling it's okay to lash out. And then the dynamic, the open dynamic between the interlocutor and your conversation partner, I think is harmed in those situations. So I agree with Janosch. Like, it doesn't mean just because somebody seems to be doxastically closed doesn't mean you can't push. But I think it certainly should be an amber light that goes on that says, be prepared to walk away from this. Maybe this isn't a great time for them or you to continue the conversation. And certainly be sensitive to I guess the main indicator is be sensitive to your frustration levels. Because if somebody is behaving like dishonestly, as in willfully being inconsistent, changing the subject, going on and on about unrelated topics, and they seemingly are doing so in order to avoid addressing the subject, in a frank manner, then I would suggest that your frustration levels are likely to start to elevate. And then when that happens, you're going to be potentially open to being dishonest yourself and in acting in a less than ideal fashion. So maybe better to walk away if that happens, for sure.
And I was in hoping to reply to Diamond there, I think there might be an interesting distinction in the environment in which Diamond, yourself, are normally conducting SE, in that it's a sort of chance encounter on the street, and it's a person not familiar with SE and all the rest of it, as opposed to, I suppose, in my reference to my conversation with Mike, it was more a long agreed upon thing, and the informed consent was discussed in detail, and the objectives were discussed that we were really hoping to inspire reflection in his belief, and perhaps have him look analytically at his own belief. And so all of that leading up to it, and then the conversation immediately being derailed into I want to monologue about my theory for however long. So yeah, I don't know whether dishonest is perhaps the wrong word, but it felt like it wasn't in the spirit of what we had agreed upon for the conversation, and certainly not what I had hoped for. But yeah, in the end, I'm really happy that I stuck with it, because I think it did get somewhere useful for myself. That's absolutely certain. For the audience is certainly debatable, but I'm happy that I did, because one thing I really want to work on is frustration and being calm in the face of the adversity of the conversation. And I just want to be a more polite, respectful person. So I think that conversation really helped me. And, you know, I'd love to talk to Mike again off the camera, and it would be an excellent conversation. I would still like to talk to him, but yeah, personally in that space. So I'm not sure what you think about like the difference of the chance encounter of yourself and the sort of more organized one beforehand. But
yeah, I feel like I just have a very high threshold. As you say, if dishonesty to me means like somebody's intentionally trying to deceive, right, or something like that, and I think that's not what you're saying there. So I think in that context it makes sense, and so that's the only reason why I feel like maybe it's not characterizing properly, because people in general do seem to, I mean, I take them generally at their word, and so they may feel very passionate about these topics, and that doxastic closure is maybe just coming from that is their position. It's not like they're trying to necessarily hide something, and maybe it's subconscious defensive mechanisms or something like that. But but yeah, given the benefit out there.
I think that's an admirable quality that you do, and I just thought that certainly highlighting the difference of it, because to say that of a conversation partner whom you just met and have just struck up a conversation with would be a huge claim. To say, oh, I think this person is dishonest, that would be you know nothing about this person, and so right. Yeah, it would seem really egregious to say it there, and it's using the wrong language. So I'll definitely be more careful with that language in the future. But no, I think you're right.
Yeah, I would agree. I make the same mistake. Ragnar's posted this 3 times now in chat, so I guess he wants to point this out. But I think I actually had it highlighted the first time you posted it, Ragnar. On the SE Discord, we encourage disengaging when the discussion doesn't interest you anymore. Yeah, or you don't like someone's behavior. Sometimes 5 people move on to a different voice channel and 1 stays. Yeah, that's totally the right thing. I think the dishonesty of your interlocutor, or like doxastic closure of your interlocutor, or just whatever the frustration component is, I think it's frustration that's happening in you, right? And so you can't control whether or not the conversation is effective entirely. You can do your best, right? But sometimes I think interlocutors might not be, willing to be sufficiently open for the conversation to happen. What you can control for is how you respond to your frustration. And I think it's a great thing to do, to recognize that you're getting frustrated and stop and just say, look, okay, that, this conversation it feels like it's a good time to end. Or if it's just started, just say, okay, I'm not feeling like I've got the right energy at this moment to engage with this conversation. So maybe I want to back out of this conversation, but maybe we could come back and pick it up another time, or just not want to address the topic. Perhaps that could be another reason why you might want to move away.
That's one thing that I was going to mention. I think many people have certain claims or certain topics that really upset them as interviewers. Like, for example, some people may get really upset when someone has super racist beliefs or claims, or talks about the Holocaust didn't happen, Holocaust deniers, stuff like that, or when it's about sexual violence, whatever. If there's something that really upsets you, that you don't think that you can have a good that you can interview effectively without getting upset, you should be aware of that. And ideally, of course, I don't think there should be any topic that you in principle you shouldn't be ready to interview. But of course, if there's something for you personally that you don't want to do, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I don't think there's any topic that's out of bounds for SE in principle, but then
Yeah,
there
that's
certainly
what I'm saying.
maybe. Yeah, I hear you, and I think that there may be bounds there. I think that's a great point. Yeah, for sure. Like, and I think there's a big difference between you not wanting to engage with the subject and you saying that the subject should never be engaged with.
Yes.
And yeah, I think that's really cool. The other thing, and this is one I'm sure you, especially when I'm talking to people about religious topics, and I hear quite a bit, is this idea that people will definitely, not infrequently, indicate that they are only coping with life in some meaningful way because of their religious views. Or whatever the view is that you're exploring with this person, that they say that part of the thing that makes it true for them is the fact that it's keeping them going, and that they're genuinely fearful about what might happen were they to no longer have this view. I'm sure you've heard similar things, and oftentimes you'll hear stories about terrible lives before the religion or the whatever it was. And that the person's life is now much better as a result of finding this thing, and those moments can come with genuine, like if you're open to that person and you're really listening to how they're saying that, it's incredibly, can be very convincing. You can start to feel their concern that they might not be able to hold on to these views. In those moments, firstly, have you had those experiences, and secondly, how do you feel about those?
I think this came up in the conversation that Anthony had with that Sean McCraney video, and I think Anthony made a really good point that if he were to continue the conversation, it might shift away from the original claim and to the claim of what you would be like without this, right? That's a separate claim, which is an interesting thing to investigate. Like how sure are you would completely change as a person? I think that's a really nice way to handle that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I think oftentimes people believe that it is, for example, a religious belief or some other belief that is helping them lead a good life, be happy, etc. And oftentimes people overestimate the influence of that, because sometimes they attribute positive things that have happened in their lives to these beliefs or to some higher being or whatever, and they're not really aware that you could have had that, or that might have happened without the belief, without that belief in that higher being or that religion. So yeah, I think an elegant way to deal with that is to not investigate the belief that this thing is real, but that thing was actually what had the positive impact on your life.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Joe, Sushi, have you guys had experiences like this? Never. That's okay. That's fine. No is
I mean, personally, like when it comes to like having to disengage, it's only when I'm dissatisfied with the conversation. I don't think anything is off bounds. These people's beliefs like have impact on my life, right? So like even if it's going to have a negative impact on their life because they lose it, well, they're having a negative impact on my life for holding that belief, as well as the majority of the world. And that's part of the reason that I want people to hold more rational positions, is because like if your belief is going to affect the worlds around you, which it does, then like it is important that we investigate all of these beliefs, and regardless if it's going to have a negative outcome on that individual, because it could have a much larger negative impact on much more people.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I like the idea of the word you used, dissatisfied. There made you seem like a sort of a Roman empress that sort of reclined on a cushion eating grapes, letting people come and proffer their claims for you. No, Sushi's dissatisfied with your claim. Joe, did you have any thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I guess I would only reflect again on what I mentioned before with Mike, but that was, I think, a particularly unique situation, because if I'm trying to use my empathy, which I always try to do, I sometimes fail, but I think from his perspective, as soon as SE began initially with you, it became not SE, but in his mind, a contention of worldviews, because that's sort of what his belief was centered around. It was around the compatibility of he was trying to make two drastically different worldviews, as in a world with God and a world without God, fit together. And so in essence of you just questioning that, you were directly going into the wheelhouse of his beliefs. So yeah, I guess disengaging might be when you start to see that, because there was always this hint of that perhaps he was wanting to reflect, but in the end, maybe he wasn't. So I don't know. That would be, again, but that's more on the useful side of things. I haven't yet run into ethical concerns, but I certainly would, because I've known people with serious mental health issues and dealt with stuff myself, and I would be very conscious of causing harm to the individual, whether it be a religious belief or whatever.
The problem with this is, like, I think these problems are stemmed from the religion, and rather people getting the proper medical help that they need and have proper psychological institutions to deal with people with mental problems, is it's exacerbated by religion itself, right? And I think like there's going to be an upset when we transition our society away from these more traditional beliefs that do have some mental health resulting from the religion, right? But I think that there's better scientific ways to handle these situations, right? And we're never going to move them into that position unless we break down the wall. And unfortunately, sometimes that's just what you have to do.
Well, I guess the compassionate analogy I would use here would be like if I came across somebody with a broken leg, and the only steps they'd taken so far was to get a crutch so that they could still get around, right? So they have this crutch there, and I say to them, hey, it would really be better if you went and saw a medical professional, got a cast, we put you in a wheelchair for a while so there's no load bearing, way less movement, all this sort of stuff. And the person says, I'm not really convinced of that. The crutch is important. Well, do I really want to yank that crutch away from them and leave them there stranded with a broken leg? And, so I fully understand what you're saying. And we really want to get as many people on board with, taking the medicine in that case instead of not getting treatment and potentially making it worse and exacerbating the injury and all the rest of it. But at the same time, that might be having that crutch that in that moment might be essential to getting them to the doctor, to getting themselves to the doctor or whatever else. So
yeah, and I certainly wouldn't want to take the crutch away from them. Like, that's the important part. It's showing them that hey, this crutch is helping you, right? Like, faith healing does work, but not for the methods that you think. It's because of the adrenaline of the situation, right? That legitimately has anesthetic effects, right? So it's like, hey, yeah, this crutch is working for you, but here's this that will actually cure the problem. This will actually help you a lot more. And that's what's important to recognize, is if we don't tell people, if we don't say, hey, this crutch isn't working for the reason you think it's working, right? It's just because you're not putting weight on the leg. That's the only reason that you're not experiencing that pain, when it's you do actually need to go to the doctor because you have an internal infection in your leg, and your leg is going to fall off if you don't go there.
And the story gets worse and worse the more it's going on. It's sounding
No, I think it's a really applicable analogy myself. I don't know, maybe it falls down to others, but
No, I agree
the puns are coming out here left and right. But
I'm just looking forward to uncharitably editing this video to make Diamond seem like a snake oil salesman and Sushi advocating for faith healing, because it's all available to everybody with sufficient editing tools today.
Yeah, I guess essentially though, you could get yourself into a scenario there where they toss the crutch away before they're able to get themselves to the doctor is really sort of what I'm driving at here. So I'd be really sensitive to making sure they didn't go into an incredibly high level of harm without a system to help them through that harm. Or
Also,
but what about the believer, like people like myself, right, or other atheists out there that were raised in a religious family where they did have the crutch yanked out from them through self-rationalization, where they never had that religious experience, and they can't get the help because of the people that are holding onto these crutches. And like, this is why I don't think this argument stands, that to some extent we do have to pull the crutch out from under people in order to make improvements.
Yeah, one thing that seems apparent is that a lot of people will fear having their whatever tool that they're using removed from them, and will want to hold on to it, even if you'll hear people say, even if I don't really believe it, even if it's not true, I still need it, like it's useful to me, like I find it useful. Like, one of the things that I think is useful to notice is that, specifically with regards to religion, and SE is not about religion specifically, but specifically with regards to religion, atheism is not an alternative to a religion. Atheism is a single answer to a single question, and atheism is not a entire system of socializing, a community, a series of rituals. It's not going to fill the gap that a religion leaves. And I think it's just useful to notice that there's definitely not a like for like change there. The other thing is that whilst it may be true that these things are comforting to this person, the one thing that can't be easily done with me as somebody who doesn't believe in a God is I can't lose my faith in a point where it might really matter. I could not, you can imagine something horrific like the death of a child or something like this, right? I could not in that moment not only lose my child, but also lose my faith in a just and caring God, and therefore lose any connection I might have to those communities of people that I've spent my life with, because now I don't believe what they believe, and I can't have that taken away from me. So whilst uncomfortable truths might be less comforting than comfortable truths, I think it matters what you really genuinely believe, because if it's not true, it's probably better to find a better tool to solve the problem that you're using religion for, or using whatever the philosophy is that you're using.
Well,
and I should
point out.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, what we're saying sounds a lot to me like we know that religion is false, and we know that there's there are better beliefs out there, and we need to work towards enabling people to be able to put the crutch away that is religion. However, and while I myself am an atheist, and while I would be very surprised to meet someone who had a very stable, good epistemology supporting their God belief, we have to be careful that this is not turning into a manual for creating atheists. We are we are trying to inspire reflection, and sure, I agree. I would suspect that, because of my personal experience, which is maybe not always the best epistemology, I would expect people who have a God belief to probably rely on faulty epistemology somewhere, but I don't know that before I talk to them.
And the funny thing was, my analogy wasn't really targeted towards religion. And as soon as I said the word crutch, I realized how loaded that term was. And it genuinely wasn't meant to be that. It was more, here's one system that's protecting you, and here's another. If I remove the first system of protection before implementing the second, it could lead to death or significant harm. So, and in a real case, ideas do sometimes sustain the lives of some unfortunately unwell people. So
I think it's
was
important to
more-
recognize is that you can still go to church as an atheist, right? And like the religion not being true part, like, yeah, okay, like I don't even know what that means. It's the truth claims that come along with the religion, right? Like a religion is a very healthy institution to get people to deal with existential problems, right? And it's a community and support structure, and I think that's beneficial. And you could totally go to a church without believing that it's all true, and that you can still utilize it as a tool and a support system.
Possibly. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with Janosch, and it's not really about religion. It's about believing things for good epistemological reasons, right? If you've got a good sound reason to believe something, it's going to be much stronger than a superficial reason that just happens to be because it's comforting for you in a given moment. And I think that's particularly explicitly the part of it that I think is important. And Sushi, I would agree that you could still go to church as an atheist if you wanted to. You could certainly get some sense of community. I know some churches are very open to that, and some communities are more open to that than others. I guess your experience may vary depending on where you are. I did want to move on somewhat, but somebody just wrote potassium.
I'm
in
just
chat.
curious
What?
if Diamond had any thoughts to reflect on that before we
yes,
move
of
past. So he
course.
might have a
Yeah,
chance to
go ahead,
respond if he
Diamond.
wanted
Oh,
to.
no,
but-
I mean, I
yeah.
think that we've been doing a really long, extended introduction of the next topic. So I
Yes.
think we should jump in there.
Okay.
And I hope we're not shortchanging it too much with only like 15 minutes to go. But yeah, I wanted to bring up this. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Please introduce. This is your topic, and I think it's a
Sure,
great
yeah,
one. So yeah.
So I wanted to talk about mental health and the stigma associated with mental health and how that can impact conversations. And this was motivated by William's topic of when you might want to disengage, because while there's many good reasons to disengage, I think that your concern for other people's mental health is not a good reason to disengage. And I'll tell you why. Because first of all, in terms of do no harm, right? That's the mantra that I think a lot of people might be operating in, that if somebody does express this concern that they may harm themselves or others if they lost this particular belief, granted, okay, that can be a situation where you may want to shift topics into why they might believe this or disengage entirely. That's not the same as being concerned about the mental health of your IL. And first of all, I'm glad that we had the disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. I don't know anything. But there is definitely real stigma associated with mental health. And by stigma, I mean, I'm pulling this from makeitokay.org, which is describes it as a set of negative and often unfair beliefs that a society has about something. And so when you ask yourself, well, how should you shift an SE conversation, if you're having it with someone who has a mental health concern? Well, turns out you probably already have had these conversations and just didn't know it. Because about like 20% of the population has some kind of mental health issue. And so chances are you won't even be aware of it, right? And if you're concerned about someone harming themselves because of the mental health, you have to ask yourself, are you justified in thinking that? Where did that come from? There's a great couple here. I'm going to share this website for a minute. The makeitokay.org, which is encouraging people to look at how they talk about mental illness. I think SE has trained us a little bit in how we would engage these conversations. So y'all can participate in this. This is great. So they say, let's start here. Imagine you're in this conversation. They say, how are you? And this guy says, not great. My anxiety is acting up again. So if you think of an SEer, right, as a person engaging, what kind of thing might you say next, right? So here's a couple choices. I'll let you guys vote. Really? What's going on? Or we've all been there. Which out of those two, which do you think is a better choice?
really what's going on.
Yeah.
Really was
Would agree.
unanimous. Okay, so let's go with that. Yeah, questions are great. Hey, we knew that already. SE is all about questions, right? So next one, there's only like 3 of these. I don't know how you say a question mark, but verbalize the question. I'm just feeling really anxious. Oh, you're fine. No, I mean, it's bad. Okay, so what can you say next? Maybe, can you see somebody about it? Or you're okay, deep breath. What do you think?
The former.
First one,
Actually,
more questions. Oh, go ahead.
I'm not sure about that because that sounds like at some point you can see somebody about it, but
Yeah,
that doesn't
the
help in
wording-
this
wording is,
situation right now.
This is
Yeah,
not
I'm
good.
not sure. Yeah.
This is not good
Yeah.
answers.
I agree. This isn't an ideal one because it's also like that we encourage people not to use you like when we do SE, right? But you know, it's opening up the person a little bit. Maybe there's better ways of saying it. But you're trying not to minimize these things. Let me see if this one's worth going into. Yeah, well, this is another one where they're minimizing it with this answer. This person's talking about depression. I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help? That sort of thing. So,
No, you don't.
Lighten up. Yeah, that's a solution.
That's
Brilliant.
useful.
Just
Yeah.
suck it up. You'll be fine.
So
Whenever
So,
I'm
yeah.
sad, I just stop being sad and be awesome instead.
So some of these things may occur in our everyday conversations, especially if you already know someone who has mental health concerns, or you're just talking to people on the street. You're more than likely to encounter situations like this, but the stigma can make us tend to shy away, and my whole point with this section is that you can still have good conversations, and it's unfair to prevent people from participating fully in society, and not recognizing them as a whole person just because of these challenges they're having. Yeah. Anyways, I've been ranting for a little bit.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I'm sorry we've left this one a little late, but I think there's a few things I'd like to call out there. One is I don't think anybody is obligated to have a conversation with anybody on any topic, right? So
100%.
If on another sort of component of the dynamic there is that maybe if somebody is in a particularly compromised emotional energy space, right? So that they are exemplifying depression or anxiety, you might not necessarily be in the space that's sufficiently able to help them. As in, we would assume that both the other person in this conversation is perfectly able to enact the energy to try to support this other person, and that just might not be the case, right? So I think it's important to recognize that sometimes people might not help others, not because they don't particularly want to or aren't sensitive to those problems, but might actually just genuinely feel that it's laboring their own well-being, which may be compromised also. But that's not to dismiss this point, and I think it's a really good one. I think SE is really important to be applied to lots of different people, not just people with anxiety or depression, but people with lots of different sort of learning disabilities. Lots of different, because there is a tendency, I think, when you encounter somebody who thinks differently to you, whose life experience is sufficiently different to you, that you feel uncomfortable and aren't sure how to engage with them. Another example of this might be children. We've talked about doing SE with children, and I think like SE with children is a great idea. Just like I genuinely would think SE with almost anybody is probably a good idea. I can't think of any explicit cases where I could say for sure you shouldn't do SE with this type of person or on this topic. I don't have any places where I would put anything in those boxes. So yeah, I think context is really important, like your emotional energy versus your interlocutors, and just recognizing that you can and should walk away if you're not comfortable. But I totally understand that, like, yeah, that example of on that website, I think is great. Yeah, definitely be open to asking questions and trying to support people as much as you can, I think.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't suggest disengaging with someone from a conversation entirely, or from any conversation, based on this on the fact that you might detect some kind of mental health issues, only that certain topics may exacerbate those issues. So yeah, it's not as if okay, mental health detected, therefore stop talking. I certainly wouldn't advocate for that.
Right.
But I would be sensitive to, because I've suffered with anxiety and different things in times of my life, and certainly comments made by family members significantly worsened my well-being at that time, and they can even come from a place of desiring to help. So you don't want to disengage, or offering a comment that you think might be helpful can be damaging. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't say that follow the stigma and don't talk to them at all, only that I do believe that there are some sensitivities that are required there for if you are concerned with the person's well-being. But
this is a great topic.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean,
even Dr. Stone, by the way.
I think this is super.
Yeah.
I think this is a super question, but I would also think that one of the problems with that is that the some people may think that changing somebody, encouraging somebody to reflect, might be causing them harm alone. Like, some people certainly see it as disagreeable. It can be equated to violence in some mindsets. But they can certainly equate just even challenging something that you might think about something as harmful. And I wonder whether or not there might be a problem with that alone.
I mean, people, therapists say that the kinds of questions that you ask in street epistemology can be similar to questions that you ask in therapy. So on the one hand, that sounds like a lot of responsibility, but on the other hand, it's also something that usually helps people get better, that is used to help people get better. And I was trying to think of a situation where it's obvious that using SE in a certain way would be dangerous and should not be done. And I thought of, connected to this issue of mental health, and I thought of someone having delusions, and for example saying things like, there are demons after me, they've been chasing me for a while now, but right now in this room I'm safe because I put a spell on the door and the windows, and these demons can't get in. You probably shouldn't question, like, how sure are you that spells really exist and are really effective? You might not want to do that.
That's an interesting thought experiment. I like that one.
Okay,
Actually,
I have to share this because I think it's right along those lines. So this is from British Columbia Society. They talk about, if you are working with someone who has delusions, you don't want to try and reason or argue or challenge. But here, when they mean challenge, I do think they mean more like debate. Attempting to disprove it is not helpful, right? You're trying, basically, this is establishing rapport, building trust. Then identify the content or type of delusion. This is where we get to the questions that you're talking about. Empathize, paraphrase. Look at that. Paraphrase what the person is saying. This sounds so similar to SE. Without agreeing or arguing, question the logic or reasoning behind the delusion. For example, if the CIA are harassing you, who is the contact person, right? So this is coming from experts in the field that are suggesting questions that do sound a lot more like SE. You can go through this site and identify a lot of similar things. How is it affecting the person's life, right? How would you be different if this wasn't true? That sort of thing.
This is remarkably familiar stuff. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So Diamond, can you make sure we get the links to both this and the previous site, because I want to make sure they're included. I think this is awesome. And I just wanted to add real quick. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say there's also a really great example I'll post a link to as well from Michigan State University, where they have an actor portraying a person who's having a manic episode, and they're talking to an actual therapist. And if you listen to how that interaction goes, it's really interesting to try and put yourself, if that was you, on and this was your conversation partner, how would you respond? And it's absolutely, it is tricky from an SE perspective, because you have this, like, there's flight of ideas and there's pressured speech. So there is symptoms that make the conversation different than maybe a typical conversation, but you're still approaching it with the same compassion and rapport and thought process that you would elsewhere. So yes, I will share those links.
No, that's awesome. I definitely think those principles are great and will stand you in good stead no matter what circumstances and situation you're in. And I did want to amend something I said earlier about the Hippocratic Oath question, which is, I think because some questions might be considered harmful, but I think actually on reflection, I'm wondering whether or not, we do actually harm patients in order to do a greater benefit, because we believe, like, for example, surgery, you're literally cutting open a patient, you're harming them, you're doing something incredibly evasive that's going to cause them a lot of recovery time, but we believe that harm that's being caused is in service of a greater benefit to the patient overall. And so it's about aggregate harm, not about never doing anything that the person feels disagreeable. And I think actually maybe makes it much more viable for us to consider the Hippocratic Oath as something we might want to adopt. Because certainly I don't think any.
Have you read it?
The Hippocratic Oath?
Hippocratic Oath? Yeah.
I didn't. No, I haven't.
There's stuff in there. For example, it says I think it prohibits abortion, if I'm not mistaken, and it says that at least for certain treatments, doctors shouldn't charge money, or they should never do it for free. Maybe it's the other way around, but it's right. Like it's super outdated. No one swears on the Hippocratic Oath anymore.
So the principle of do no harm is come to usurp what is clearly a dated document. I get you.
Yeah.
But the principle of do no harm, I think, is still sound enough. But yes, I think that's good. We've kind of run out. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. No.
I
just had one final thought. Yeah. I think what Diamond addresses is really good, and it's important to note that that the less so in removing a belief that someone might have a crutch on, but anxiety and depression, these other things are essentially a claim about the world, a negative self-claim, and they can be explored with SE, as was indicated by the mental health websites that you referred to. So I do think it's important to reflect on, and it has been incredibly useful for me when having those sort of negative thoughts. You can quickly take a check and reflect on it and think, okay, well, that doesn't really make any sense. So yeah, those tools could be really useful for someone with mental health as well. So it's very interesting. It's a topic I'd love to discuss if we could find someone with training.
Let's get an expert on here.
Let's do that. Somebody that knows what they're talking about. I won't have to caveat everything they're going to say by saying I know nothing. I did one other thing that I wanted to mention, and that reminded me of is that I think we need to distinguish between street epistemology and therapy. I think they can look very similar, and I think that they can in some spaces seemingly fill the similar void, but I do think that they are massively different in terms of, if nothing else, the competency and accountability the person having the conversation has to the conversation. One of the things that I wanted to mention previously when we were talking about people that might be feeling that harmed by the loss of their belief, is that we're not there to pick up the pieces. Like, the street epistemologist is very rarely going to stick around. And I know people do make an effort to hand a business card to somebody, provide an email address and support contact information, and want to be there to continue the conversation and continue the journey. But by and large, this isn't always going to be the case. And so I think it's really important to recognize that it's very easy to ask questions that open doors, and not nearly as easy to be there for somebody while they explore all the rooms behind those doors. The next therapy session on the Tuesday next week isn't booked in. It's not as fun.
Right, exactly. So it's an important distinction to make. Yeah,
but it's great. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll just add. In the United States, at least, we have the phone number 211 that you can call for, a whole variety of social support issues, and that's really useful if you do just come across someone that needs help, and you don't feel empowered to help them. That's a great place to at least direct them.
And Beyond
Yeah,
Blue
that's
is
great.
another one that I think is that is accessible globally for people. So
What's that one?
it's
Sorry, Joe?
another- Beyond Blue.
Beyond Blue. Awesome.
Yeah, it's a more depression based one, but if you see someone that might really be struggling, it's a sort of gateway for someone who's, if you're concerned with it's a good place to send them. But yeah.
That's awesome, guys. I feel like we could talk about almost all of these subjects. They could have been a show in their own. Like I feel like I'm just pulling the show back to becoming just about one topic per show, because I think all of these things are just great. But honestly, not least of all, made possible by having such great guests. But unfortunately, they couldn't turn up, and I got you guys instead. So thank you so much for doing this. I sincerely, genuinely appreciated it. Sushi, you do nothing to plug. Joe, nothing to plug. Diamond Discourse, check it out. Oh, you gonna plug something? You got?
I would only just say, like, it's good to see you all again. It's been a while. Like, I haven't spoken to Diamond or Janosch in a long time, so it's awesome to see you guys and catch up.
Indeed, welcome back, Joe. And yes, I know I need to do your logo, Janosch. I can't believe that I'm the only thing that's holding this whole endeavor up. It's baffling to me,
only you, nothing else at all.
I mean, I know I'm this important, but I'm surprised to think that other people know it too. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. Really appreciated it. Do check back next Friday for another one of these. And yeah, really appreciated all the comments and banter in chat, except for that one comment. You have been put on the list, sir. You know who you are. You know what that comment was. But yeah, thanks very much, everybody. Take care and goodbye.
Bye.